Is it all right?
Do you wish to go first? Okay. Okay, perfect. Right. Shall I
You
lead
going
you
first?
Up?
Right, okay. Thank you. Hello.
Goodness, I don't think I've ever heard a hush quite like that up here. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I can tell you're as excited as I am that this evening we have the legendary Sir Michael Morpurgo with us, who had to stay at Mainstreet. We think of as you're slightly our patron saint in the Bundes of
I think that's approximately right, yes. No, you mustn't say legend, because most legendary people are dead. Well, they are, aren't they? And I'm not dead.
I think you could be a living legend, and that you
That'll do. That'll do.
I'm going to do very quick housekeeping before I forget and get carried away. The session will last about an hour, and that will include time at the end for questions. So think of all your good questions, and don't forget them, because that's what I always do, just at the last minute. We're going to have the books are already signed, for those that would like, which is back in the other building, so we'll go over there afterwards. Anyone who's got a phone, please turn it to silent. I've got anything? I think that's it, really. I think really we just need to give Michael a huge round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, it's lovely to be back up in this little attic. It's wonderful. It's intimate up here. I've talked in lots of big halls, and it's quite difficult because you project yourself and you miss people. Here it's like talking to a family, so it's lovely to be here. I thought what I'd do, because I'm conscious of the fact that there are young people here, aren't you? And there are some older people here, some even approximately my own age, as I want to talk to everyone and try and make it as inclusive as possible in terms of age. So the older people will forgive me sometimes if my humour gets a bit puerile, and the children must forgive us if it gets a bit serious from time to time. That's what literature is about, so the combination of the two. And actually the man who was truly brilliant at the two, that is the comedy and the tragedy, was an Englishman. I don't like to say this up here, but he was. He was called Max Shakespeare. And he lived from near Birmingham, and I did something not long ago which I've always wanted to do. When I was growing up, as a small boy, I was given a book called The Tales of Shakespeare, written by a man called Charles Lamb and his sister Mary. People of a certain age in the room will have probably had this book in the house. I read it to my own grandchildren about, I don't know how long ago it was, about 10 years ago. And I realized that they didn't understand a word. That's because the language it was written in the 19th century was already sounding old and distant, and they couldn't really understand it. It was even more difficult than Shakespeare. So I thought at some point that I would write those tales of Shakespeare for today's children, these sort of people. Why? Because what I do know is that no writer in the English language has had this extraordinary scope of tragedy, history, comedy. No one seemed to know and be able to write about the human condition, how it is to be born and to live and to be joyous and to be sad and to get us through this difficult life. Better than Shakespeare. He knew men, he knew women, he knew old, he knew young. God knows how. He wrote a play called King Lear. Some of you will know. All about a really old man, an old king, who's my age, and he was losing it. He was losing his memory. He was losing his judgment. And he made awful decisions, and he brought terrible tragedy down upon himself. But now that I'm old, 80, you clap when someone says 80, you clap, you clap. Now that I'm 80, I am thinking how extraordinary it was for a man to write with such extraordinary insight about old age when he was 41. The man knew nothing about old age, but he knew everything. Well, how does that happen? It's a genius thing. And I'm a bit of an educator, and I love the idea that children should see the best plays, the best of literature, the same way they should read it. And a lot of children look at Shakespeare, and because they have to study it at school, they go, oh no, it's a bit serious, I don't want to do that, Let's go to Harry Potter. Fine. Harry Potter's fine. But it's not Shakespeare. Shakespeare goes extraordinarily deep. You could never go to a Shakespeare play and walk out without having learnt something about the world about you and about yourself. So I thought, I've got to retell these tales for children of today. But I didn't get around to it until there was an accident, and it happened to all of us. It was called the pandemic. And I have to tell you that for the pandemic lockdown, it sounds awful, it was brilliant for writers, because writers are on their own anyway. You're not supposed to all the time go down and have cups of coffee with people. You're supposed to get on with your writing and be alone. You don't even need a mask to do that, do you? And I was feeling pretty miserable. We sort of all were. I couldn't see my children. I couldn't see my grandchildren. And we were sort of cut off from the world. And my wife said, you need a project to keep you going right the way through this. So I thought, now's the time. So I sat down and I read every single play that Shakespeare has written. He wrote lots of them, far too many, and some of them are not that brilliant, but that doesn't matter. We all make mistakes. What Charles Lamb had done all those years ago, 200 years ago, is he picked out the best of them. And I picked out the best myself, what I thought were the best 10 stories, and I put them in this book, and it's just come out. So what you're about to hear is a mixture of Morpurgo and Shakespeare. It's a magical mixture. And I love doing it, but I thought I'd do it because I'm going to be talking about serious things. I thought I'd do something a bit silly first. There's a wonderful play called Midsummer Night's Dream. Put up your hands if you've ever seen it. Okay. It's unbelievably complicated plot. All Shakespeare's plots are so complicated you have to laugh. And if you work it out, you're a genius. And I'm going to read you how I have, in a way, translated that play into this story. I shan't read it all to you, because it's very long. Are you sitting comfortably? A Midsummer Night's Dream. Strange how confusing a dream can be. How different stories seem to weave themselves into one. Mostly we forget our dreams as soon as we wake up. This one is about as confusing as a dream can be. But when Will Shakespeare woke up, he did not forget it, which was lucky for us. Prepare to dream. To begin with, Duke Theseus of Athens and Hippolyta, once queen of the Amazons, were planning their wedding. This was all some time ago now, in fact, a very long time ago. There was in those days in Athens an unjust and unfair law that a daughter had to marry whoever her father said she should marry. And if she did not do as he said within 4 days, then he had the right to put her to death, which, you'll agree, was quite unfair. And of course this could cause problems, serious problems, especially if the daughter wanted to marry someone else. Anyway, here's the situation. Concentrate now. Hermia is in love and wants to marry Lysander. But her father, Aegeus, insists that she should marry Demetrius. In fact, he's already arranged it. Of course, Hermia doesn't want to, because, as I've said, she's after Lysander. And she has another reason, too, for refusing her father. She knows that her best friend in all the world, Helena, loves Demetrius to bits, has told him so often and wants to marry him. And anyway, Hermia doesn't love Demetrius. But there's another problem. This story is full of problems, as indeed the world is. Demetrius has already turned Helena down. He's got eyes only for Hermia, but Hermia adores Lysander. So she refuses her father's wishes, and she and Lysander decide they have only one thing left they can do. They're going to run away into the forest and hide in Lysander's aunt's house there, where no one will ever find them, where they can be happy, and most importantly, where Hermia won't be put to death. Are you with me so far? I'm not going to go on. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And it's become maybe the most famous play in the whole world. And that's the plot. And I just loved trying to weave the story from the play into this. So if you'd like to look at it later, there is, well, you can tell me, one of the children can tell me actually, which is the most famous Scottish play Shakespeare ever wrote? In fact, I'm thinking he only wrote one. Yes. Congratulations. I was going to read you that, but it's a bit gloomy. So, the other thing I did during the pandemic is to do, and it's really good for older people, some people will know this here, to do things you haven't done before. It refreshes you, you think you can go on and do something different. Now, I've always admired poets. I always think poetry is the best form, in a way, of storytelling when it's good. It's what Shakespeare was good at, telling stories through poetry. And I've always admired poets. I've always thought you had to be really clever to write poetry, which is why I never tried to write poetry. I was happy writing stories. Then came the pandemic, and a request from a friend of mine who said, I want to make a book entirely about trees. Have you ever written any poetry? So I said, yes. One thing about writers is they have to be good liars. That is what you do, you tell stories. And I said, yes, not many. And he said, would you like to try? And of course, now I put myself in a position where I had to. So I said, okay. So I found myself having to write this book. It's called My Heart Was a Tree. I had to write this book about why I loved trees, which I do, and why they are important, which they are, as we all now know, we didn't know before. I'm lucky enough to live down a lane from someone in Devon who wrote the most marvellous poem about a tree that I'd ever read. He died, sadly, quite some time ago now, but we became good friends, and he wrote this poem, and his widow said I could use the last line of it. So I'm going to read you his poem, and whilst I'm reading it, I want one of you, to guess who wrote it. There will be a chocolate for whoever guesses right, and deep humiliation if you guess wrong. It's a wonderful poem. It's called My Own True Family. Once I crept in an oak wood. I was looking for a stag. I met an old woman there, all knobbly stick and rag. She said, I have your secret here inside my little bag. Then she began to cackle, and I began to quake. She opened up her little bag, and I came twice awake, surrounded by a staring tribe, and me tied to a stake. They said, we are the oak trees and your own true family. We are chopped down, we are torn up, you do not blink an eye, unless you make a promise now. Now you are going to die. Whenever you see an oak tree felled, swear now you will plant two. Unless you swear, the black oak bark will wrinkle over you and root you among the oaks where you were born but never grew. This was my dream beneath the boughs, the dream that altered me. When I came out of the oak wood, back to human company, my walk was the walk of a human child, but my heart was a tree. Who wants the sweet? Anyone know who wrote that? Anyone guess who wrote that? It's by a man called Ted Hughes, and he lived down the ledge. So the children might have read, what's the famous book about the giant? The Iron Man. He wrote The Iron Man and other things. Anyway, that was a book. So I took that last line, my heart was a tree, and I started writing poetry. Now you're going to hear one of mine. Not the same quality, but I love doing it. And funnily enough, this poem is about Scotland. I have connections in Scotland. My brother married a Glaswegian, poor man. No, he's a lovely woman, he's a lovely man. So I used to come up here quite a lot and visit. And I visited a place which was one of the most extraordinary places I've ever been to. It's called Orkney. Has anyone ever been to Orkney? Great. Well, I'd never been to a place where there were so few trees. Why? Because the wind blows. All the time the wind blows. But the reason I wrote this poem was something remarkable, really. We were just driving back to the bed and breakfast we were staying in, through some houses, and I looked out, and there was a garage on a bit of an estate. There was a man in there, a carpenter, and he was making a chair. And it looked interesting. Writers do this, you probably shouldn't. But I stopped the car, and with my wife got out and walked over to him. I said, what sort of chair is that you're making? He said, oh, it's a driftwood chair. I said, what do you mean driftwood? So, well, I picked up the wood off the beach and bring it back, and they've been making chairs like this in Orkney for hundreds of years. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, I bought an Orkney chair. In fact, I bought 2 Orkney chairs, one for my wife as well. And now at home we sit there like a couple of old biddies, her on one side of the fire in an Orkney chair, and me in the other, and we read books there, and that's what. And I love my chair. The seats are made of rushes, and the wood is just this lovely colour of wood, really washed by the sea, washed and washed. So I thought I'd write a poem about driftwood. You're going to have to join in. At some point, when I put my hand like this, I want you to say, first life. Would you say that? Next time I do it, I want you to go, second life. Then it's third life. Do you think you could do that? I'm going to sit down because it's easier. It's a bit of a story. Don't get bored, children, not yet. Driftwood. This chair was born where I was born, in the forests of Nova Scotia, about 1,000 years ago, maybe more, but who's counting? This chair has had as many lives as a cat. I know, because I am this chair. I made this chair what it is, what I am. This is the history of a chair, of me, call it my autobiography. First life, which began the day I fell from a red oak tree, dropped and bounced into leaves, lay there for days, waiting, but didn't know what for, nor why, until a jay came down, hopped over to me, picked me up in his beak, and off we flew. Buried me deep in the forest floor, covered me up, hid me from squirrels, but must have forgotten all about me, about where I was, which was fine, as you'll see, because I got to have a second, which was to be the luckiest life of my life, dormant for a while, until there came a spring that warmed me through, that gave me longing, a longing for life, that grew inside me like a burning hope, like a faithful promise. A green shoot broke me out of earth at last, and began to make a sapling, then a tree of me. Deer nibbled elsewhere, and let me grow strong and tall, up towards light and sun, towards a which was long, as seasons came and seasons went. Falling of snow followed falling of leaves, till the sun came each spring to warm us through, and I grew ever taller, ever stronger, ever older. Branches spread, bark thickened, roots deepened. Winter blew in, did its worst to all of us every year. Lightning crackled and struck, but I lived to grow old. I dropped more acorns, shed more leaves, stood there still, till, wearied and weakened by the passing of age, I came to my fourth life, which I knew had to come one day, as it must to us all. It took a great and terrible storm to tear up my roots and blow me down. Long, long I lay there and thought of the forest life I'd had, of the bears that had stood up to scratch their backs against my trunk, of the squirrels who made their homes every year in me. But that was all over now. That was all done. All I could do was lie there and wonder if my family would still be standing, live long after me. I hoped there might be not an end, but a new life now for me, a fifth life, which there was, but a change entirely of life, the end of me as tree, the beginning of me as wood. I remember how the loggers found me, walked and talked around and about me, climbed and clambered all over me, how they brought out their saws and took off my branches and trimmed my trunk, how horses hauled me away through the forest, floated me down swirling rapids to lie there in a boatyard to dry, where the people came to admire me, children to play and climb on me. You'll make the finest boat, they said, patting me. And so began my... As a fishing boat, I was to be mast, keel, hull and decking too. They stripped off my bark and sawed me up. They planked me and planed me and made me boat. Sky blue I was painted. Sky, they called me. I was pride of the port the day I set sail. The band played, they bedecked me with flags. They cheered and they clapped. Their sky and their joy I was as I sailed out into wind and waves that heaved me and creaked me. But I'd been tree. I knew how to be strong. Wind and sea were to be all the same to me in my seventh life, or so I thought. I was the biggest, fastest boat they'd ever had. Everyone said so. I was sky. I was proud to be me, to be loved as I was. This was the life for me, the best a new life could possibly be. I was a lucky boat too. The fish and the gulls seemed to love me, follow me, so we filled our nets and trip after trip came safely home, our barrels full, fish to eat, fish to sell. Sky had done it again. Happy days, happy years for them, for me. Unsinkable, they told me I was, and I thought so too, till the day we hit the iceberg and my eighth life began. On our way home, sailing along nicely, wind behind us, harbour and home in sight, but iceberg was waiting, lurking, unseen, sharp, sliced us open below the waterline, left us sinking. They came out to save us, rowed out through the waves, and save us they did, everyone on board, not a soul lost. But they could not save me. Wind and tide and wave drifted me in, dashed me on rocks, broke me in pieces. Sky was lost. I was lost. Which brings me to my ninth life. Of flotsam and jetsam, most of me sunk except the keel. Tide took me out, what was left of me, and floated me out to sea, where wild storms took me and tossed me and turned me, and brought me at last to a strange, treeless shore. Washed me up on a sandy beach in amongst the cowrie shells. She was searching for cowries and found me there. The remnants of the keel of me took me in, dried me and cared for me, carved me fondly, sanded me too, made an Orkney chair of me, sits on me and tells her children the story of me as driftwood, where I came from, how I came to be here and chair, told them all the 9 lives of me. I listened too, as they do, over and over again. I love her story, my story. Hope you have too. Thank you. Love being a poet. Makes me feel better to be a poet. Anyway, I've written an awful lot of stories which I've loved doing over the years. Some of you will have read some of you won't. But I thought I'd read one that some of you might have written or talked to you about it. I'm going to read 2 that you might have written and one you certainly won't have read. Has anyone here read The Butterfly Lion? This one? There you are. Stand up if you read The Butterfly Lion. Would you stand up, please? Could you give them all a clap, please? Could you? Right, could you sit down? Could you put up your hands if you have not read The Butterfly Lion? Put up your hands, you horrible people. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Come on, stand up there, be proud. Will you give them this now? Boo! Sit down, sit down. Anyway, look, it matters not. The offence is skin deep, I promise you. The Butterfly Lion. I just want to tell you, because there are writers in this room. There always are, young ones, older ones, lots of people trying to write their stories just like I am. And I thought it would help if, with the 2 or 3 stories that I'm going to talk about, it gives you a sense of how this particular writer, and everyone's different, gets started with the whole thing. The story of the Butterfly Lion really came from going to a book festival. It wasn't unlike coming here. It was going to a place where there were a lot of books. And I walked past a bookshop. Where are we? A bookshop. And I saw a book in the window. I'm talking about 25 years ago. It's a second-hand bookshop. And I walked past the window. It's in a town called Hay, on the border of England and Wales. And in the window there was this book with an extraordinary cover on it. It was a photograph of a white lion, not a picture, not a painting, a photograph of a white lion. I didn't realise there were white lions. And I was fascinated. I went into the shop. I asked the shopman, could I look at that book? And I took it off and I looked. It was full of photographs of white lions. Now, this is fantastic. So it cost me £5 and I took it away. The text was quite boring. It was a sort of a study of a pride, a family of white lions in South Africa. But it was quite technical and quite scientific, and I skipped through the words and focused on these extraordinary photographs. I don't know, a week later I was on a train coming from London down to where I live in Devon, a place called Exeter, and I was on that train line. And here's what I was doing. I had the book of all these lions open in my lap. And I'm going along on the train, and you know what happens. The train stops, but not in a station. Quite common. And I did what all of us were doing. You just look out the window. We all do this. Train stops in the middle of nowhere. You look out the window and you think, oh, where the hell am I? You're in the middle of nowhere, you know. And then I saw this amazing thing. There's a hill in the mid-distance. And on it was this huge white horse carved out of the chalk near a place called Westbury. And so there it was on the hillside in the sunshine. And I was going, white horse? White horse? No. White lion. White horse. White lion. White I'm very slow at picking up things. And I suddenly thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to try to make a story in which the lion, the white lion on the front of this book in the photograph, somehow could end up on a hillside, carved out of the chalk like that. That's just how it started. The idea sits in my head and becomes a dream. Do you remember talking about dreams, the Midsummer Night's Dream? It becomes a bit of a dream. And with a dream, you don't go to sleep and dream about it, you sort of daydream it. And bit by bit, other things happened that made me write this book. The first thing really was this. I had this idea that somehow this would be connected to the First World War. Don't ask me why. It's probably because of a book I wrote called War Horse, and that was in my head. I was at a dinner party one evening. For you young people, this is why you go to school. It's so that you can go to dinner parties later on. That's the whole purpose of life. And there I was sitting there at this dinner party, and I swear to you, the most boring man in the entire world was sitting right next to me. It's always, and he had the loudest voice in the world. And he was going on and on and on, but he then came up with something which made me write this book. We were just sitting there, and we were talking bizarrely about grandfathers. Don't know why, but we were. And he said, well, my grandfather, he went to the First World War, you know. And then it started being interesting, and I stopped noticing his voice. He said, my grandfather went to the war when he was 17 in 1914. And he got lucky. He said, a shell fell in the trench. And bits of the shell, the shrapnel as they got, went into his leg, which meant he had to be taken out of the battle, away from the front, and go to hospital 30 miles behind the line, where they mended his leg. And it was difficult in those days because infections were terrible and it was a very, very bad wound, but he recovered. And when he was recovering, the doctor said, what you must do now is exercise that leg. You must get it moving again. You must walk into the village every day. And so in this convalescent hospital, 30 miles behind the line, he walked every day into the little village a mile down the road. And he was walking in there one day with a friend of his, and they were sitting down, the village cafe, having a glass of wine. And he was leaning on a stick, and they heard shooting. Someone firing guns round the corner. And the war's 30 miles away. So they were pretty upset. They got up and they went round the corner. And there, in the village square, was drawn up a circus all the way around the square. And in all the cages were these animals. And most of them were dead. And the man was standing there with his rifle, going around shooting all the animals. And he, they were told, was the owner of the circus. So this young soldier, I was told around the dinner table, walked up to this Frenchman, tore the gun out of his hand and said, what are you doing? And he was saying, these are my animals. I can't feed them. No one comes to the circus anymore. There's a war on. There's no hay. There's no food. They're dying of starvation. What am I supposed to do? And there was one animal left alive, and it was the old circus lion. And the British soldier, this grandfather, when he was a young man, said, well, you're not shooting that lion. So the Frenchman said, well, you look after it if you can. I can't. And an amazing thing happened, and this is true. I love true stories. Fiction's rubbish. This is a true story. What happened was that this young man and the old French circus owner got the lion out of the cage, walked down the village street. Can you imagine them dashing into their houses? Walked up to the castle at the end of the village where the officers all lived, and they came running down the steps. Said, what's going on here? What's going on? And the young man said, sir, this is a lion. The Frenchman wants to shoot the lion because he can't afford to feed it. I have to tell you, sir, that the lion is the emblem of our side, the British. We cannot have a lion be shot. Can we, sir? And the fellow said, well, I jolly well think not. They sent that lion to London, where it lived out till the end of its days. So I'm sitting at a dinner table. Someone has told me this story. And now this lion, of course, in my head has become white, that's for sure. I think I must write this story, I must write this story. But I didn't know anything about lions. And you cannot write about what you don't know about. Well, you can, but it doesn't work. I thought you've got to find out more about lions. And something happened, a lovely accident. Actually, it was a love story. This is what happened. I went to Dublin to do an event at a book festival. And I was in a hotel, and the morning I was leaving, I had my breakfast, and I came to the lift. You're thinking, what has this got to do with a lion? You'll find out in a minute. I came to the lift, and I pushed the thingy, and I waited there, and this lady came and stood next to me. And I just noticed her. She's beautiful, unbelievably beautiful. Here's the problem. I knew her, but I couldn't remember her name. And not only did I know her, I knew I had been in love with her, and I couldn't remember her name. And she was stood there. And we got in the lift, and I was sort of trying to remember, and I said to her, what floor do you want? She said, 4, please. My heart melted, because it was a voice I remembered as well. I'm married, by the way, with several children, you know. This is all totally wrong. There I was in the lift with this woman, who I know I loved, absolutely, couldn't remember who she was. Press it, and then I remembered who she was. She was a film star called Virginia McKenna, and she had starred in a film called Born Free, which is all about lions. So I'm stood in the lift with this woman I love, and she's got all this lion stuff locked up in her head because she knows all there is to know about lions. And I said, I was really all of a tremble. I said, it's just lovely to meet you, and I really love your Born Free. You're pathetic. I was going all wobbly I was, and she said, oh, it's very, very nice, and she got out of the lift as fast as possible. And I went back to my room, and on my bed, I didn't know, I was completely confused. On my bed I saw this book, which is called The Dancing Bear, which is about a bear kept in a cage, which is what Born Free is all about, not putting animals in cages. So I thought, this is it, this is your moment. You messed up, but you can make it better. So I wrote in the book, to Virginia McKenna, with love, and I meant it. But I didn't give it to her because I was too shy. I picked up my case, I ran downstairs, and I gave it to the reception. I said, if you could give this please to Virginia McKenna. They did. A week later I got a letter. Dear Michael, I read your book. I really loved it. If ever, I didn't ask this, if ever you want to write a book about a lion, please be in touch, because I'd... I mean, that's how stuff happens. It's not writers sitting there, thinking, oh, please, God, send me down some inspiration. For me, it doesn't work at all. I won't read it to you. Buy the book. It's very cheap. This book, I won't talk to you about this book, because this book's very exciting for me at the moment. I'm not going to get anyone to stand up, because I know that was a really bad idea. Hands up anyone who has read a book called Kenski's Kingdom. Hiya, be seriously proud. Put your hands up. Okay, if you haven't read it, let me tell you about it, and then maybe you might want to. The reason I want to tell you about this book is because it's just been made into the most amazing film, which is coming out nearer Christmas. And I wanted to tell you about the book so that you will go to see the film and then buy the book. That's very important. Kenski's Kingdom. It's about a boy who falls off a boat in the Pacific, swims to an island. The boat sails off into the darkness with his mother and father on board, and he's alone on this island. So why did I write a book about this boy on this island? First reason is because of the greatest Scottish writer that you have. What's he called? Who wrote a wonderful book about an island and many other things besides. Robert Louis Stevenson. He's my great hero. He wrote Treasure Island, and in my head I've loved islands ever since I read that book. So that's the first thing to tell you. The books that you read give you ideas later on. So that's the first reason. But the other reason is this. I was listening to the radio one day in England, and I heard this remarkable story about a Japanese soldier after the Second World War had been discovered on an island 27 years after the war was over. He had stayed there for one reason or another, and I won't go into it now. He had stayed there and become this hermit on the island. And I just heard it and I thought, a Japanese man from all those years ago, from that old war. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if a boy from today, I'm just looking around for a boy who might be suitable. I don't know. What's your name? I don't know that you're suitable. I don't think you'd like to be alone on an island, would you? I'll make it you. Could you come up here? And stand here beside me and be company. Okay. So this young person is the one who swims to the island. You're all alone on the island. Okay. You've got no food. Okay. You've got no water. Okay. You're in trouble. Okay. Okay. You go to sleep. All you want to do is to rejoin your mum and dad on the yacht, and that's sailed off into the darkness. Are you happy or upset? Upset. That's right. Thank God he answered that right. So we end up in a situation where there he is. He's lying on the beach in this strange, strange place. He wakes up. And beside him on the sand, there's a plate. And on the plate, there's pieces of fish. And there's some fruit. And so you know there's someone else on the island, don't you? Mm-hmm. problem is he doesn't know who it is, so he goes around hunting for this person and eventually meets him, and he's an old man by now, well into his 80s. Here's the problem. He really doesn't want you there. It's not nice not to be wanted, is it? He's rather nasty to you. He wants you to go away, but you've got nowhere to go to. You try to explain to him that your mum and dad were on the boat and you want to light a fire so that the smoke can bring them back. He doesn't want you to light a fire. He won't let you light a fire. You have a big argument. And the whole story is about how this young person gets to know this ancient man from another time and how they get to live together. And can I ask how old you are?
10.
You had to think about that, didn't you? That's fine. When you get older, you'll have to think for longer, I promise you. I'm going to read you, and so you know, so people out there will think I'm making it up. I won't do it, you know. Listen, it's the first line of the book, and it's probably the best line I've ever written, and I'm here to tell you, it's probably the best line anyone has ever written. I'm a very modest person. Do you know what modest means? Yes, do tell me, please.
Okay, modest is like where like you don't really lie and like you always speak the truth.
You speak. Oh, good. That'll do. It's not right, but it'll do. Here's the first line. I tell you what, it's quite good. It's a roll of drums. I'd like you to go. Stop! I disappeared on the night before my 12th birthday. You clap after such a thing. Thank you. I will pay you later. Thank you very much. I think one more thing, and then which is a bit serious. I've left the most serious till the last, really. Funnily enough, it's about the radio as well. I listen to the radio a lot. It burbles in the background, and then suddenly you hear something. But here's what happened one night. I had this dream. It's all been about dreams. That's why I've told you these series of stories. I had this dream. Deep sleep, I was, and I dreamt that it was a zoo somehow. That's all I knew. There were animals there. And it was the wartime. I knew that because there were planes in it and bombs in the story. And I got a bit upset, I suppose. Woke up once or twice and went back to sleep, and the dream continued. And it ended up with this woman in the zoo telling the man who was running the zoo that he couldn't do it. He mustn't do it. And then I sort of heard what the man intended to do. He intended, as the boss of the zoo, to shoot all the animals there because the bombers were coming over, and if the bombs fell on the zoo, all the animals could break out into the town. So he'd been ordered by the army to kill all the animals. And the woman said, who was the elephant keeper, "You can't do that. You can't do that." And she had brought up a young elephant on her own, and she said that my elephant is 2 years old, it wouldn't hurt a fly. I can't let you do that. And he said, "Look, it's got to happen. I've been told. Every animal in the zoo." And she said, what would happen if I took the young elephant out of the zoo each evening when I go home, and I put it in my back garden with a wall around? Would that be all right? And he said, "Well, then it'd be your responsibility." And then in the dream, I saw this woman walking this elephant home and putting it in the back garden. And I woke up. And I don't know how long afterwards, I remembered bits of the dream, rather bitty, like I've told you, all bitty. And I nudged my wife. I said, "I've just had this amazing dream about an elephant." And she said, "You're always having dreams about elephants." I said, No, it's a really good dream. It was an extraordinary dream. And it's about wartime and a zoo. And she said, "Excuse me? It's wartime, a zoo." She said, No. She said, "That was on the radio. I heard it too." Not a dream at all. She'd heard it. So I looked it up on Mr. Google, which you can do too. If you look up Belfast, elephant, zoo, Second World War, up will come a photograph, if you please, of an elephant in the back garden and the lady standing right there having a cup of tea. So I'm thinking this is just extraordinary. And I knew I was going to have to write the story. So I thought, I don't want to write this about England or Scotland or Ireland. I want to do this a bit more interestingly. I will do it about Germany. Some of you will know that there was a lot of bombing here on our island, but there was a lot more bombing in the end in Germany. And there was one city they bombed, which is called Dresden. When I say they, I mean we, the Americans and the British, bombed it. And terrible fires happened, terrible fires. And it was one of those dreadful, dreadful tragedies of the war. And here's what happened. They did bomb the zoo. They didn't know they were, but they did. And it was found out later that exactly the same order had gone out to the zoo in Berlin. You've got to get the animals out before the Americans and the British came, and they didn't do it. They left the animals there, and they died. So I thought, no, set it there. Have a lady in a garden with an elephant in Berlin. Have her try to escape from the city afterwards. So I wrote the story, and it's called, what's it called? An Elephant in the Garden. And I like it a lot because I lived it. Whenever a story I write, I've got to live it really as if I'm there. And I was with that family as they left Berlin. And they went towards the east, towards the west. And it was really important they went towards the west because the Russian army was coming in from the east and everyone was frightened of them. So, I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were walking down the roads of Germany towards French, British and American troops that were coming into Germany from the other side. And they were walking to safety of sorts. They didn't want to be there when the Russians arrived. And it's the story of that journey. Anyway, if you'd like to read it, by all means do. It won't cost you much. Listen, I've talked a lot. I'd like a drink of water, which I've got here, but if there are any questions you want to ask, now is the time. You've got plenty of time. Yes, please.
How hard is it to write the books?
How hard is it to write the books? Do you know, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. It's a really, really good question. I don't know how you measure hardness on a scale, but I can tell you that I've written now 150 books, which is a lot, but then I'm very old. And every single book is hard. It doesn't come any easy. You know when you're small and you first learn to walk, all right? In the end, you wobble a bit, you sit down on your bottom, you get up again, you fall over, you learn it, and sooner or later you walk. That's it, and it becomes easy after that, doesn't it? Until you get older, but that's another matter. The truth is that there are certain things you learn and you then just do it almost naturally. I think with writing, every single book is difficult, and it should be, because if you're writing and it's terribly easy, it means you're not really inventing anything new. You're not thinking very hard about it. You have to think about it very, very hard, and it is hard. It isn't a race, but you want to do it, and I want to do it because I love doing it. I'm at my happiest when I'm deep inside a story and writing it. And if I'm not, I'm like a bear with a sore back and not very easy to live with at all. I really would not advise you to live with me if I'm not writing. If I'm writing, I'm sweet as pie, I promise you. But the truth is, it is difficult, but it's so wonderful when you're in it. And you know the best bit of it, I'll tell you, which makes it all worthwhile, is when you put a final full stop. And you look at it, and it's been, I don't know, 6 months' work, it's been 2 years' work, whatever it is, but it's done. And you take a deep breath, and you send it off. In my case, I hand it to my wife first, and she reads it. That's the difficult, hard bit. What you mustn't do, I'm just advising you now, is if you do want in later life to live with someone, you don't have to, but if you wish to, you be careful you do not choose someone who is honest. You do not want to know the honest truth. Be with someone who's going to flatter you and make you feel good. I chose really badly 60 years ago, and I'm still getting this stuff. Yes, it's all right, Michael, but are you good at it? I put the final full stop. Why are you telling me this? Deeply annoying. No, seriously, it's hard, but it's worth it. Do you like writing stories? Yeah. Good. Well, keep doing it. Keep doing it. It becomes more and more fun. But don't pretend to yourself it's not hard. Almost nothing worthwhile is easy. I don't know why. It's really annoying. I think brushing your teeth is quite hard. I don't like doing it, but I do it every day like a good boy. Yes?
What's your favourite book?
Do you mean of my rubbish or someone else's? In general. These questions are all too good. Why did you invite them along? I think there's a wonderful book which is really short, and it's so good for now, at the moment. It's called The Man Who Planted Trees. It's by a man called Jean Giono. It's a Frenchman. It's a really short book, and it's an old man who lives in the wilds of the mountains where everything is dry and nothing grows, but he's got sheep. So he needs things to grow. He's a shepherd. And he has the idea of planting acorns in the ground. And it's a short book, but it's about his whole life. How he goes out every morning with a sack of acorns, whatever the weather, and he plants them. And he does it each day. And there's a young man who comes to see him and comes back 10 years later. And when he comes back, there's this sheen of green all over the hillside, all over the hillside. Comes back 15 years later, and there's the beginnings of a forest. And of course, when you plant trees in large numbers, the water comes, the birds come, the wildlife comes. He understood this from his heart many, many years ago, which we all should have done. And I think it's a very beautiful book. The Man Who Planted Trees by Jean Giono. I'm quite cross that he wrote it because I'd love to have written it first. Yes?
Who's your favourite author?
Who's my favourite author?
And Claire Balding said that she's your favourite author.
Claire Balding said what?
You're her favourite author.
She didn't. I paid her to say that. Who's my favourite author? Do you know, I told you Robert Louis Stevenson was my favourite author. I think he probably is. I read him. How old are you, may I ask? 10. I think when I was about 9 or 8, I read Robert Louis Stevenson for the first time. I loved Treasure Island, and then I read every single word that man has written. He's the only man I know who writes fantastic books for children, amazing books for adults, serious novels, poetry, for goodness sake, travel books, for goodness sake. The man was a genius. He's completely wonderful. He's the writer I most want to be. I suppose that's Robert Louis Stevenson. Then I would have been born in Scotland, wouldn't it, if I'd been him? It's been quite nice. I'd have had a tartan of my own. I have the knees for it, you know. Yes?
When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
When did I know? Gosh, these are good. I'm trying to remember the honest truth. I think I knew when I was a teacher in a primary school. What do you call it in Scotland when it's 10 and 11? What's the stage of the... It's year 6? Yeah.
P6, 7.
Sorry?
P6 and 7.
Okay, that sort of age. I taught them in a school, and I like teaching. But the thing I liked most, because I had a wonderful head teacher who told me this, was reading stories to them. From 3 to 5:30 every afternoon, I'd read them stories. That's the bit I loved best. And then one day I ran out of a good story to tell. A story I was telling wasn't working from someone else's book, so I decided, or it's not true, my wife decided, she decides everything. She said to me when I went back and said, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm in the middle of a book and they're not liking it. She's also a teacher. She said, well, don't go on reading a book if they're bored with it. The worst thing any teacher does is to bore children. Don't do it. So I said, what am I supposed to do? I'm in the middle of this book. She said, drop it and make a book up yourself. Make a story up yourself. You are quite a good liar. So, which is certainly a bit true, but not I'm a brilliant liar, actually, not quite a good one. Shall I tell you the best lie I ever told? You'd like that, wouldn't you? I tell you, it's a really good story. No, it's good. I went to a school, it wasn't Hogwarts, but it was like Hogwarts, exactly the same sort of building, boarding school, and we'd come back at the end of term, and there'd be 12 of us in this carriage, steam train, promise you, steam train, exactly like that, Hogwarts Express, coming back from school. At the end of July, I hadn't seen my parents for 14 weeks, really excited to be going home. We were all excited, all jumping up and down, and we were all saying, what are you going to do in the holes? What are you going to do in the holes? And they were saying, I'm going to Spain, I'm going to France, I'm going to Scotland. I wasn't going anywhere, but I didn't want to say so. So I did this. I have no idea why I did it. I have no idea. I looked at my watch. I had a little watch called a Timex watch. And I looked at my Timex watch and I said, well, I really hope the train's going to be on time because the Queen's coming for tea. And I looked up, and I swear to you, every face in the carriage was... I've told good lies after that. That's the best. That's the best. I don't know. What was your question? I'm not even sure if I've answered the question. It doesn't matter. We've had a good time. Yes?
What's your favourite book that you've written and why?
What's the favourite book?
That you've written and why?
Well, it's very strange. I think with most writers, if they're honest, it's always the one that you're either just writing now or one you've just finished. And I just finished a book a week before I came down here because I knew I was coming down here and I wanted to finish it before I came. And it's the strangest book I think I've ever written. Really odd. But I've really enjoyed it. Probably next time I come up here I'll be talking to you about it properly, but I'll just tell you, it's an idea. And it begins strangely. I had to take my wife not long ago to hospital. Not for anything terribly serious, but it was A&E. And I thought she should see someone pretty quick. So we took her to A&E. And we went into the waiting room. And it was packed. I don't know what it's like up in Scotland. But we are crowded. So there were 70 or 80 people in this room where there should have been 30. People were sitting up against the walls. It was just, and sitting on the floor. It was terrible. And anyway, I was there with my wife. And I knew it was going to be a long wait. Then this nurse comes in, who I think was the big chief nurse, the matron or something. And she clapped her hands and she said, I want you all to listen because I have something very serious to tell you. I only have 3 doctors on duty today. There should be 15. There are 4 times the number of people there should be sitting in here. I have 9 ambulances outside. I have no beds free in the hospital. I know most of you are going to be waiting here for 12 hours. So if you have some complaint which you really think will wait until tomorrow so you can go to your doctor, please don't stay. And I looked around this room and everyone's shoulders went like this. There was just such misery because we all knew we were facing this long wait. And everyone's anxious in hospital. You don't want to be there. You want to get out and go, you know. And I suddenly thought, they're going to be here. I'm going to be here 12 hours later. And then I thought, actually, I'm not going to stay. I'll take my wife somewhere else, ring up 111 or something. And then I thought, no, I want to think about something. And what I wanted to think about was that all these people had nothing to do. I thought, someone, some wonderful person will say, look, we can't just sit here like lemons. Why don't we tell each other stories to keep each other happy? There's a very famous book called The Canterbury Tales, which is about a bunch of pilgrims going to a cathedral in Canterbury. And they all tell tales to each other to pass the time. So I thought, so I've written a book which is full of the tales of different people in a waiting room. And they're all different people, young people, old people, people with stories to tell, people really shy, jokes, all sorts of stuff. People get into the spirit. It's karaoke, basically, but it's stories. And I'd written this book, which is full of all these very, very different stories, all about the lives of the people who are there. So you learn so much. It's actually what people want to do in situations like that, because otherwise, anyway, that's what I've written. It's called, I'm very fond of the title actually, it's called The Whispering Tree. Another tree book. That's not very good. I'll change that. But anyway, that's my favourite book at the moment. Okay? Yes. First of all, you.
What inspired you to write stories?
in the first place? People like you. Because I was a teacher, and I learned something as a teacher, which was that it's really good, if you can, to have the children who you teach enjoying what they're doing. And they learn more if they enjoy it. And one thing I had discovered quite quickly, bye-bye you people, bye-bye, all the best. No, don't worry. My wife's always walking out at me when I get boring. We'll pack up in a minute, we can all go. I suppose what it was, I discovered that they really wanted to be taught, but also entertained at the same time. You can't force knowledge and understanding down people. It's got to be, they've got to come halfway. And stories was the best thing I could do to get them to love books and reading. So I would do it and do it and do it. They didn't learn any maths at all. It's because I can't do maths, but apart from anything else. So I love doing that. And so that's what turned me in the end to wanting to write stories as a job. It's what I do in my life now. But it started because I wanted to hold your attention. I clearly have failed with quite a lot of people this evening. There we are. You've got to live with failure. That's quite true. Yes, right at the back.
What book are you writing right now, and how old do you think you'll be when you stop writing books?
What book am I writing now? And what was the second part of the question?
And how old do you think you'll be when you stop writing books?
That's the most interesting question. How old will I be when I stop writing books? Well, I'm 80 now, as I told you. I'd be lucky if I was still going on in another 10 years, but you never know. I could get lucky. What was the first part of the question?
And what book are you writing?
Well, I've just told you what listen, I've finished it just... You're like my wife. What are you doing now? What are you beginning... I've just finished a book, for goodness sake. You should be saying, well done, Michael. Well done, Michael. Instead of, what are you going to do next? I don't know what I'm going to do next. But thank you for suggesting I should. Yes?
Have you ever thought of writing an autobiography?
That's also a good question. I would say in answer to that in most of my books, there is something autobiographical. If you read, for instance, The Butterfly Lion, at the beginning of The Butterfly Lion, the small boy is running away from school. I ran away from school because I went to a school which I hated. The food was dreadful. I hated the teachers, and I wanted to go home because I was away from my mum. So I cried a lot of the time. So one day I just decided, I'm going home. And I ran out, and I kept running, and I kept running. And I got lucky. I was running down the road, it's a true story, and I heard a car behind me, and I thought it was a teacher coming after me. And I knew I'd get beaten if I got caught, so I went running faster. She comes past me, stops the car, a little black car, and she says, "You all right, dear?" Crying my eyes out. I said, "No." She said, "You go to that school, don't you? You go to that school?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Where are you going, dear?" I said, "Home." She said, "Well, how far's home?" 100 miles. And she said, "They're ridiculous. It's raining, get in the car." Now, you know, never get in anyone's car. But it was then, it was a little black car, and she was a little old woman, and she had a dog. So I got in the car, and she took me to her home, and she sat me down in front of the stove, and she took off my wet shoes and put them in the oven, and she gave me hot chocolate and a sticky bun, and then she just talked to me and calmed me down. I've never forgotten it. And that, if you read have you read The Butterfly Lion? Well, read it! If you do, you will find it begins with a boy running away from school. And it's a really good book. Yes? Right, can I have 2 more? Otherwise there'll be trouble. Yes?
How old were you when you finished your first book?
How old was I when I finished my first book? I think I was 29 last year. Yes?
What is the book that was funnest to write?
Funniest?
Funnest. The best one.
Ah. Whoa. Is writing ever fun? Fun isn't quite the right word. It's a good question because it provokes what does fun actually mean. If it means do I enjoy it, every book. I enjoy once I'm writing it, once I get into it. The other bit I really, really love. Let me tell you the bits I really think are fun. You ready? The first thing is when the idea comes. I've told you about lots of ideas. You go to a dinner party and someone tells you, you think, oh, that's good. So that's fun. And then you start weaving the story into your head. And that's fun. And then comes the day when you know you've got to sit down and go, once upon a time, and start it. That's not so fun. And then when you do it, and you finish it, and I've told you put the full stop, that's really fun, because it's done. The best thing, though, is this. When you send it off to the publisher, she's been a publisher, she knows this, she reads it, she doesn't know it, but sitting at home is some writer, nervous as waiting for her to say whether she likes the book or not, because she's the one who's going to make it and print it and have it there in bookshops. So that's a bit of a tense wait. And then a letter comes saying, dear Mr. Morpurgo, because they can never spell you. Oh, no. I've had Mr. Flamingo before. dear Mr. Flamingo, I liked your story. And you go, oh, thank God. And then a year later, this is what's really good. This is the fun bit. Fun is a good word, actually. I didn't think it was, but it is good. A packet comes through the door, and you open it, and it's the book. And you look at it, and you think, oh, that's my name. And they spelt it right. And the book then becomes something you really love, because you put heart and soul into it. Someone else has the publishers, and then it is fun. And then it's fun coming to a place like this and talking about it. But it's enjoyment, funny, ha-ha, no, but fun is a good word. I shouldn't have criticised you. It's a very, very good word. Thank you for your question.
You're welcome.
It's all right. Did you bring this person? Could you not do something about it? Thank you. Thank you for bringing it. Yes, last one, because otherwise people will start shouting. Ah, the most successful book. Probably, it's either Warhorse, but not for the right reasons. Warhorse, when it was published, no one wanted to buy it at all. People didn't think it was very good, except my wife. She thought it was the best thing I'd ever done. She's quite nice sometimes, my wife. And anyway, it didn't sell very well. Then, 20 years later, someone wanted to make a play of it, which is coming back again, by the way, to Edinburgh and Glasgow, so please go and see it when it comes, this next thing. It's wonderful. And then people started to realize there was a book called Warhorse, so they bought it, which was nice. Do you know why writers like the books to be sold? Can I tell you this? It's quite important. The thing is that when you get a book like this, there's a price on it, you know? It means you've got to pay, let's say it's £1. If you are the most famous writer in the entire world, let's say you're J.K. Rowling, you will probably get, I don't know, 12p out of that £1. If you are not known at all, you might get 3p. If you're kind of like me, you might get about 7.5p if you're lucky. However, if the book sells well, and millions of you go out and buy it, then I can afford another pair of socks. Can I give you some advice? When you next go to this bookshop here, you can walk out, you'll see all these writers here, and you'll know their names, you'll know Philip Pullman, you will know J.K. Rowling. Sooner or later, you will come to my name, all right? Walk past all the other names until you come to the one that says Morpurgo and buy it, because I need the 7.5 pence. If you buy J.K. Rowling's book, she has got cupboard full of socks and everything. She does not need socks anymore, do you understand? And Roald Dahl's dead as he doesn't need socks anymore.
There's a call to arms I've never heard before. Thank you, Michael. Michael is going to join us in the bookshop. So if you've brought a book with you, or if you'd like to get one of the many, many that are way down our tables over there, they are all pre-signed, I emphasise, so that job's done. So please form an orderly queue, and I'm quite sure a certain amount of chatting and handshaking might happen.
On one condition. If the book is by J.K. Rowling, I won't do it.
Deal. Open the gate first.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.